Welcome, listeners, to a brand new bonus episode of Oh My Word podcast. And today we've got a special treat because we have writer-author Sandra Rostirolla with us. And Sid Blue is the one who told us about Sandra. So thank you to Sid. And Sandra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Esther. I'm very excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. With that, what we always start with is kind of the origin story of how did you get into writing, why writing, where did this all begin from?
Wow. Writing has always been a passion for me. However, I'm a STEM girl. So in high school, I was the physics, chemistry, math girl. And I really actually kind of struggled with English. It's like it actually was not one of my stronger subjects. However, whenever I wrote a creative writing story where they didn't really care too much about spelling or anything like that, I always got really good marks. The teachers just sort of brushed that aside because I was the STEM girl. So I really forgot about it for the longest. I'm originally from Sydney, Australia, and I moved to Los Angeles. And that's when I started to really think about it. And I took some classes at UCLA. And my teacher there, that was sort of my aha moment when he said, a lot of people that are good at math are also good writers because they really care about plot. I went, well, maybe I am allowed to do this. I started off just writing screenplays. They were the first things, placed in a few little competitions. But it was really writing a novel that I realised how much I loved writing. But I got into novel writing by pure accident. So what happened is my husband's a composer and he wanted to write a ballet. And I thought, well, I can help you with that because a ballet story is really short. It's like 8 to 15 pages. And so we came out with a very rough outline, like the 5 acts of a ballet. It's like one line, Cecilia in Plockton. You know, Cecilia goes on her journey. And I just started writing the story, just whatever came to my mind. I just went off on this adventure with this character, Cecilia. And I got about 90 pages in. Because every time I showed my husband, he just kept saying, yeah, that's great, keep writing, keep writing. And then 90 pages in, he turned around and said that he's actually not going to do the ballet anymore because he's too busy. And I'm looking at this big chunk of work and I'm like, well, what do I do? And he's the one that said, turn it into a novel. And I went, what? Like, no, I've never written a novel before. I don't know anything about writing a novel. So I resisted actually for a couple of weeks. I was like, no. But then I kept thinking about it, and off I went. Took those 90 pages, turned them into like 350 or something like that, and became a novelist. That's kind of the short story of it, or the long story.
What does it mean? So I just decided I was going to write a ballet. How do you write a ballet when you're the writer and not the choreographer?
All a ballet story is just the story of what the ballet is. So you actually don't need to worry about choreography or anything like that. So when I met my husband, we sort of would have a bit of a clash in regards to when he produced my album for me. But I was more writing lyrics. And so he would say he'd read my lyrics and he would hear music to my words. But for me, in order to write more lyrics, I wanted him to write music. I actually heard words in his music. So after I was done with my lyrics, we had a little bit of a block because he wanted me to keep writing lyrics. And I'm like, no, I need some more music. So I think for him, he wanted the ballet story to help him write the music, if that makes sense. I guess ultimately because a ballet can go for about 2 hours, that's why he kept saying, yeah, keep writing. I think he wanted me to have like 2 hours worth of story for him to write to as opposed to just the basic outline. That if you were to go to a ballet, they're usually about 5 to 10 pages, so you can read and just know what the ballet is going to be about, if that makes sense.
Like it does, but also what do you, as the writer, you write Cecilia goes to the market or whatever, and then does that become a 3-minute dance? How does that translate?
Yeah, well, we never got that far. The one thing, the way it starts is the ballet is at 5 acts. So, yeah, we actually never got that far. And all I really got were the titles of the acts. Like I said, very basic, Cecilia in Plockton. So I understood that he would probably want to write a lot of nice pastoral type music, very scenic kind of things, because we're starting off with Innocence, this young forest girl. So I just started writing her story. Who is she? Why are her people there in this forest? And then Act 2, usually in a ballet, is when you introduce your antagonist. And so I just had this other little line where we introduced the senators of Vetus, who are our bad people. So I thought I had to go, okay, what's Vetus? What's this city? What happened to this city? And we turned it into a post-apocalyptic type world. I just needed that one little line, and I just went, okay, and I just sat down and just came up with this world, this city, and who were these senators, and what are they doing? How are they corrupting their people? How are they oppressing their people? So I don't know whether that's answering your question, but I guess all I needed was just one little nugget, and I just started writing. But we never got that far for how Kurt was going to turn all that into music. That didn't happen.
I don't think I ever knew that there was an actual writer with ballets that are not specifically the choreographers.
Yes, the librettist is the writer, and that's pretty much all they do. They write the story.
What?
Yes.
This is a very big moment right now. A very big learning moment. Wow. Okay, so coming from, so I guess you do the ballet and then you did the screenwriting after that, correct?
No, I've already been writing screenplays.
Okay.
But what ended up happening is, yes, I was 90 pages in. It was like I'd finished the story. You could call it a really solid treatment at that stage, like 90-page treatment. I actually turned that into a screenplay because I wanted to submit to a screenplay competition. And since I had a story, I'm like, well, let me do that. Right. But then I also turned those 90 pages into a novel.
Wow.
So for my first novel, I do actually have the screenplay version of it as well.
Oh, that's good. Well, so one second. A ballet is told in 5 acts and a screenplay is told in 3 acts. So how do those line up to each other?
Actually, a screenplay can also be told in, or any story can be told in 5 acts as well.
Right, so usually you just have, for a screenplay, it would be like, well, beginning, the middle, and the end. The way it was, everything that goes wrong, basically, and then kind of all the resolution of it. Kind of like big clump, like very vague things. So it seems like the ballet, it breaks it down a little bit more to add in the other 2 acts. One is just a whole act is introducing the antagonist.
Apparently that is a very common thing that in ballets, Act 2 is usually, and I can kind of picture it too. I haven't gone to a lot of ballets. You know, you start off in this very nice, scenic kind of world, and then you jump into this dark kind of, you know, you're introducing your antagonist. What made it interesting for me telling the story is, even though I wrote the first version of Cecilia based on that ballet story, the problem is Cecilia doesn't technically get to Vetus, like that aspect, until later on in the story. So I had a lot of rewrites, or I had to change my plot because I ended up telling Cecilia through her point of view only. So with that limited point of view, I couldn't even really talk about Vetus until she got there. So It was a very strange process for me that I'd written it one way based on the ballet story, and then I had to change it and figure out the plot just being from Cecilia's point of view.
And we're not saying this as a rule or anything like that, but it seems like the ballet doesn't have the specific point of view. You can't introduce necessarily another character then.
Exactly,
like right.
Exactly. A ballet technically could be more of an omniscient, point of view. Yes.
I mean, there's so much other stuff, but this is very interesting. And then what would be the 4th act that's officially in a ballet that you may or may not see in a screenplay?
Again, I've never done a ballet story before, so I was learning from my husband, so we just sort of did the 5 acts. I even did a TikTok on this, and I just can't remember it off the top of my head because I'm so bad with these kind of things. Pretty much the 3 act is broken into 5 acts. So basically, when you have Act 1 and Act 2, for the 5 act structure, all you're doing is putting another point in between 1 and 2. I forget what they call it. They call it something else, and the same thing when you're coming into the 3rd act, you're just having another beat there. It is sort of the same thing, but the only difference is, like I said, the ballet always in Act 2. I guess that would be considered the inciting event or the break into Act 2, like that moment in a normal story. You're always introducing your antagonist at that point in time, which I did. Don't get me wrong, I did introduce it in regards to the fact that these dark riders ride into Cecilia's village and kill everyone.
Well, yeah.
The slight difference was in the ballet, we were actually introducing the people behind the Black Riders, which were the senators of Vetus, which I had to kind of change because Cecilia doesn't meet them until late in the 3/4 through the story. She arrives at Vetus. So.
Right. And another thing you've got is that Cecilia became a trilogy.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that was the other thing. Never planned it to be a trilogy. Not at all. I did it as just one book. Could be read on its own, but it was really more my fans and friends going, well, what's the rest of the story? Is there more? And it took me a while. I think I released book 1 in September 2017 and wrote book 2 and 3 at the same time. Like I plotted out book 2 and 3 so that there wouldn't be such a massive gap between the 2 of them. And so book 2 and book 3 came out, I think book 2 June last year and book 3 January this year. So there's only 6 months between the 2.
Ah, very good. Did you find that it was also a benefit to plot out book 2 and 3 at the same time? Because we could go back and forth between them. If you figured out this would be really cool for book 3, but wait a second, I have to set it up in book 2. But you can't do that to book 1 anymore because it's out.
Absolutely. Like, I really did like the idea that I plotted out book 2 and book 3 together, because there absolutely were moments where, like, I think I need to tease this out, because little things happen. If you're a storyteller, things crop up that you don't even know you're going to do. And then you think, well, that's pretty cool. I can tease that out a little bit in book 2 and build that storyline up a little bit more. So, that was actually good to have, definitely.
When people were asking about book 2, and you actually finally decided to sit down to write it, how hard or easy, what was it like to think about another, great, I need to think of a whole other book now? Or did you kind of sort of know what it was going to be?
It was a challenge. The biggest challenge I had was at the end of book 1, Cecilia and her main guy, Amelard starts off as an antagonist towards her. He's supposed to kill her. He's an assassin. But he goes from her captor to her guide to her lover. So it's a slight enemies to lovers story with those two. Well, the whole thing is, the comment is that he's aware that she's pregnant, that she's going to have a baby. But that's as far as it sort of goes, because it's all part of this prophecy. There's this entire prophecy, and they kind of figure out that this entity, they couldn't figure out who this entity was that was going to be the great leader. And they didn't know that it was going to be Cecilia or Amelard, but Amelard figures out, no, it's our child, our son is actually going to be this. And that's sort of where it ends. So I'm now going, oh my gosh, I've got to write book 2 and book 3. I can't have a heavily pregnant protagonist. That was my struggle. I didn't know what to do with Cecilia and Amelard's baby. I didn't want the baby to die. I didn't want Alistair to die. So that was a real struggle to figure out, what do I do with the baby so that I can have my protagonist go off and still do her journey but not have her baby with her. So that took me a while, but once I cracked that egg, I was like, oh, okay. But it was definitely challenging, because the other thing I've got is this prophecy. I needed to extend the prophecy, if that makes sense. That was challenging as well, to be able to go, well, how do I extend the prophecy and figure out where it's all going?
You gave everybody such a nice ending, and then all of a sudden it's not the ending anymore.
Exactly. I mean, the whole story is when they discover the prophecy, it's all laid out. This entire prophecy is laid out, and it's written in a cave. And I'm like, if I've got the beginning, middle, and end of the prophecy. But I came up with a cheat to figure out that there was a chunk of the prophecy in the middle.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so I was able to sort of spin how that worked. But that part was definitely challenging, very, very challenging.
Yeah, because either you backed yourself into some sort of corner in the first book because it's out and you can't make any changes, or you just have to figure out, what did I not specifically say in the first book, because that's where my openings are.
That's what I was able to do. I was like, oh, I can see a loophole. There's a bit of a loophole there. And it worked.
Well, and then coming from screenwriting, and then you're writing a full novel, what about that? Was that, oh my goodness, why are there so many words in this thing? Or
all my screenwriter friends, I've got a group of friends, we all met together in this Australians in Film. There's a group over here called the Australians in Film, and they had a writer's room. There was a whole group of us that went to that, and so we're still friends today. This was about 7 years ago. They've all been on this journey with me, but I sort of one of the only ones that broke away and has been writing novels. They're still writing screenplays.
Yeah, the rebel.
And things, and they just look at me and they're like, how do you do it? But I've got to be honest, I don't think I'll ever write a screenplay again, ever, unless I'm converting one of my novels. The part that I was terrified about novels is the part I actually love. So I used to think, how do you write a novel? Because at least in a screenplay, you just say exterior house.
Yes.
You leave it at that. But you kind of got to describe a little bit more of the world to do some world building, or you just go exterior forest. But when you write the book, you've got to give the sights, sounds, smells of the forest, and your characters' impressions of the forest, and how that, and that freaked me out. But that's the part I actually love doing. It's definitely different, very, very different, but I just feel my stories are way detailed and more insightful, and my characters are definitely far more well-rounded than my characters in my screenplays.
Right.
So
that was something for me also, because I went also from screenplays to novels, and it was, where do you find all the words? Even now, I don't necessarily overwrite. I know a lot of people, that's part of their struggle of when they're writing their drafts, they write too many words. I was like, great, now I got to cut so much. I don't usually have that issue. It could just be me as a writer, or maybe because I came also from screenplays where I usually don't have enough words. Even now, I don't usually have enough words. I'm sold on novel writing now, of course. It's just interesting. But after you wrote the first novel, what was your decision about getting it published?
I tried to do the traditional route with it, but I sort of understood that it was going to be a tough sell, because I had a lot of tropey things, where the funny thing is readers like a lot of tropey things. Readers like the whole, the chosen one, the orphan that becomes the hero kind of thing, the innocent girl that becomes the warrior at the end.
Yeah.
But a lot of publishers are like, ugh, don't want to go near tropes, don't want to do any of that sort of stuff. And then the other thing is I realised that I didn't have a massive hook, if that makes sense. I mean, the story pretty much is just set in a post-apocalyptic future, dystopian-type world, and basically this innocent girl living in the forest gets pulled into this battle between the goddess of light and her evil shadow, and she gets pulled on this journey where she ends up becoming the leader of the free world. But I mean, sure, it sounds great and epic and cool, and readers love it, but publishers, it's just, there wasn't like this clear what's different. I was fine. I was very realistic about it. I think if I was to go back to my original pitch letters, and because that's a skill in and of itself, coming up with the pitch, and I'm like, yeah, maybe my query letters could have used some work kind of thing. I had a lot of friends that had self-published, which was great. So I had a lot of resources to be like, what did you do? What do you do? And it's just a learning process, and you do it and you get your stuff out there. And I submitted book one to several competitions, and I was really shocked at how well I did. I've won like 2 different awards, placed in about 5.
Nice.
And it was quite shocking. And my husband loved it. And this was happening just up before the pandemic happened. So we got to go on about 2 or 3 little book awards, and he loved it. He's like, any excuse to fly to a different part of America. And then the pandemic happened, and there was one that we were supposed to go to up in Washington State, but it got pushed back because of the pandemic, and then it ended up just being a Zoom kind of video thing.
Well, does he also sort of take credit, though? Because if your book's winning awards, he's the one who told you to turn it into a novel. So.
Oh, only jokingly he sort of does. He'll be like, so where's my credit on this? But no, he loves it. So he also comes from the film world, which is, again, why I think he likes the idea of having the story written. Because, again, he doesn't really just like to write music for the sake of it. He needs a film. He needs the visual medium to help guide what kind of score he's going to write. But no, he loved it. He's like, it's just happy to just sit back, and he loves being around authors. He thinks authors are great people to be around.
Well, that works. The competitions and stuff, that was after the book was published, or as a manuscript you submitted it?
No, that was after the book was published.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say, wouldn't that help you then in your querying to say, hey, I just won a bunch of awards, but...
Yeah, no, it was after.
So you self-published it. Did you go to a company, or did you use KDP, or what did you...
No, I did it myself. I just had my own imprint called Pincus Books, and I just got some ISBNs from Balka. So I do both. I'm on Ingram Spark, and I'm also on Inside. Well, I think it was still CreateSpace when I first did book one, and then it changed over to Kindle Direct Publishing. I do both because definitely Ingram Spark is better to get the distribution in the other countries.
Oh.
So, my friends in Australia that wanted to get a hold of it, and then a few people. My husband's European, he's from Switzerland. Oh. So, yeah, it was, I think, like the royalties, definitely. The royalties are better that if I went through that as opposed to however Kindle does it for the PODs, the print-on-demand books.
Right. And so did you put together your own, you had to go and find your own editor, your own cover designer, you had to put together a team for that?
Yeah, I found my entire team. I lucked out with my editor. I was at a party and I ran into a guy who's a film director, but we bonded on the fact that we'd both written our first novel. And he'd written a novel too, and he was raving about his editor. Look, we talked about getting published, and he goes, look, Sandra, because even me, he said his cousin's a literary agent. Couldn't get it published. So he said that it was his cousin who referred this editor to him, and I just reached out to her. And look, at the end of the day, she did make me also realise that my debut novel, she really helped. All I can say is I don't know what she did, but I would go through and I'd be like, how did she change that sentence? What did she just do to make this paragraph sound like it's really professionally written? So the poor thing, I did think I did make her work. Even she was totally blown away by the time she came to edit book 2 and book 3. The amount of work that she had to do was like minimal compared to book 1. I've definitely come a long way with my writing, that's for sure.
That's amazing. That also goes to show how important a good editor is. And people get afraid of editors. It's like, no, the best thing for you is to get a good editor.
You've got to spend the money, especially if you don't, if you're not going to go through a publisher that's going to do all that for you. You have to, and I'm so glad I did. I would have been mortified publishing my book without going through an editor. Even when I republished, because I changed the cover of Cecilia Book 1 had a different cover to what my trilogy has, because I just found it very difficult to do Book 2 and Book 3 based on the original cover design that we did. So even then I thought, well, this is my chance since I'm doing a second edition. Let me go back and just read Book 1 again. Even though we picked up a ton of them, I still had a lot of passive sentences. I was like, that's a bit jarring. So I had the opportunity to at least fix things that I thought were an issue. So that was kind of fun.
It's so crazy because you could put so much time into a book. Some people put, it's a month, some people years, whatever it is. And you think like, this is it. And then as soon as you write the second book, you're like, wow, I love the first book, but why did I think that was going to be like the climax? Why did I think that was going to be the best thing I ever did? There's only up. It's crazy how that why did I not realize that?
Well, I think it comes back to the whole thing, we don't know what we don't know, right? We write what we write. We're not deliberately writing a poorly worded book or, that's not the intention, but we just write what we know. And it's not until it's pointed out to us that we go, and so then, again, like anything, it becomes a skill, and then you just don't realise how much your skill has improved when you come to Book 2 and Book 3. I think that's why, because we didn't know what we didn't know about.
Yeah.
For me, passive sentences were such a struggle to get my head around. I tended just naturally to like writing in the passive way. I quite liked that whole passive way of writing something, and it did my head in for the longest. Now, very difficult for me to think of the sentence in the passive format. I go straight to the active way of structuring the sentence. That's why when I went back to Book 1, I'm reading these sentences. I'm like, no, that's not how it should be. You've got to be more active than that. It's worded incorrectly.
Without specifying, I've seen, especially when you read enough, some authors, they've got these big debuts. The book is so great and so wonderful, and they go on to other stuff. But you kind of see, I guess you could say, a solid sense of the writing style at that point. And it seems some books are going to be better than others, but as a general thing, their debut was so wonderful because you see there's something special about that author, and then the other books, it kind of still has it. And then sometimes there's this one author that her books were becoming really big, and I didn't realize that the book that I picked up was not her first book. It was a duology. I read both books. I thought they were great. And then I started to look for more books by this author, and actually, I realized, she has other books out there. I read one of her first books, and I was like, this is not that good. It was such a good moment of, I should specify, not that it wasn't necessarily a good novel, but for her, I had already read the better version of her writing. So the second version, I was like, I can't do that. But the first version, I was like, I could do that writing. It was such a good moment of take a deep breath. There's a lot of different writers out there, and each has their own way, and that's how it goes.
I kind of figured that could have been the case for me, because Book 2 and Book 3 were just very lean, and I could tell. I'm like, oh my gosh, and it hit me like a brick when I read Book 1. I'm like, oh no, this stands out too much. So let me just change it and fix it.
So you did go and redo the whole of Book 1?
No, I mean, basically I went through. My editor had picked up as many passive sentences as she could, but clearly I wrote nearly everything passively. So there was still some. Okay. And then stupid stuff that I didn't pick up, and, little things like, she sat down. You don't need to put the word down in there. Just she sat.
Right.
Little things like that. She looked with her eyes or something. Stupid thing, but you know what I mean? So it was little things like that which I caught, and I went, no, I'm just going to clean up these sort of repetitive annoyances, if that makes sense.
I don't remember if it was a writer or an editor I saw was like, you don't have to say nodded their head. Of course, they nodded implies that the head is being nodded.
Right, what else are they going to nod with? Yes. Or I punched him with my hand. What else are you going to punch him with? Yes, exactly. Little things like that I went, which I wasn't doing in Book 2 and Book 3 because I understood that wasn't what I'm supposed to do, and it was very jarring for me when I read Book 1 and caught those little things.
My brother and his friends were like, when you have your book out, that's the way it has to be. You're not allowed to go back to it. The rule is what's published is published. And look at them like, I don't know how I feel about this rule. What if I want to change something? You also get to a point where you just have other stuff to work on. You were releasing redoing covers, so you're upgrading it anyways. But it's like, if I'm not going back to it, that's time I have to start allotting to go. I don't know if I want to go back to some of the first books.
I would never have done it. I would have just said, fine. I mean, look, the first version was the version that won all the awards and everything. What do I care? But it really just was because I was doing Book 2 and Book 3, and I really wanted Book 1 to feel like it was part of the Book 2 and Book 3 in regards to the read.
And why did you choose to write YA? Did it just seem like, well, of course it's going to be a YA?
No. Again, that wasn't a conscious choice initially. I actually just wrote the story. And it really wasn't until I started to get into marketing and that whole aspect where it's like, you have to make a decision. And I had actually set Cecilia to be older. I think I'd made her 20 and I pushed her back to 18 because that's kind of the cutoff for YA. Then I sort of realised that the fantasy, I wasn't a George R.R. Martin. I could tell that my content, put it that way, my content was definitely YA friendly. Don't go into massive sex scenes, don't go into, not a lot of swear words or anything like that. So I just aged Cecilia down because everything else about my book was YA. So I just aged her down to 18 and went, yep, this is YA.
And also, a lot of people, you look at YA fantasy versus other fantasy, YA fantasy is just, I don't know what the right word for it, but it's not simpler in plot. It's simpler in the amount of characters that come in and the amount of places and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly. That was sort of the other thing that I realised as well, that if I was doing YA, you don't want to jump into a lot of heads. That was the other thing I had to change. I started off with this omniscient kind of weird point of view. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I brought it back to Cecilia's point of view. And I know that readers like that a lot, that you're only in one point of view. For book 2 and book 3, I had to make the decision that I needed to step out because there was just no way. The story just got so big. Cecilia goes on one journey, Amelard goes on another, her brother goes on another. I did have to make the choice of having, I think I have about 3 to sometimes 4 points of view. Do a chapter, you say Amelard, you do his point of view, Cecilia's point of view. So I did do that for book 2 and book 3.
To separate the point of views by chapters?
Yes, and I had to do that. And it seems like it still works. I had a tough time getting through a lot of Game of Thrones. Like, I loved watching the series, but I do worry about changing points of view because you're so heavily invested in a character and then their story kind of stops and you're in another character's point of view, and I know that can be very tough, especially for younger readers. That's another thing in YA. You tend not to have too many point of view changes. I think like 2 is sort of supposed to be the max.
Oh, yeah. I'm coming out with a trilogy that's got 3 points of view, so yeah. Oh.
And in the YA genre, look, mine had, book 2 and book 3 had 3 points of view.
You can see if it worked also. So I think you could, to an extent, still judge your own work to say the flow is still there, and especially your editor will tell you. The flow is still there and the story's going. It's not jarring. If not, they'll tell you it's too jarring. Move somebody around.
Yeah. I know that in book 3, it's even more comfortable because by the time Cecilia and Amelard actually come back together, which is in book 3, we're not really changing points of view from a different storyline, if that makes sense. So they'll still be in the same plot. They're still all moving forward towards the same end goal. But we'll just see it from Amelard's point of view or Cecilia's point of view. Whereas we literally were on separate journeys in book 2. So you're sort of going back to this journey and this particular plot of that journey and this journey and that particular plot. It still seemed to work, but it definitely was a struggle. The big compliment that I got from my editor was the good hooks at the end of the chapter.
Yeah.
Making sure you have a good hook and then a good way to come into the next chapter and making it very clear that you remember with this point of view character, which was maybe 2 chapters ago, right? That you've got to remember what were they up to. So you've got to pull the reader back to orientate exactly the cliffhanger that you left 2 chapters ago. So that was not a challenge, but I was very aware that that was important, and I did get good notes from my editor about that.
That's great. Did you write the story in the sequence of the way the story's told, or did you write one character and then start inserting chapters for another character, splice and dice kind of thing?
I wrote it in sequence. I always have a map. Maps are so important to me. I can't really tell a story without a map. I had the map, and the map helped define at least the physical journey that everyone went on, right? Okay, this is the physical journey. Amelard's going to go up over there, Cecilia's going to go down over here. And then determining, okay, well, who are they going to meet along the way and everything like that. But definitely I just wrote the story and I made sure I pretty much just rotated through my characters evenly. So Cecilia, Amelard, and whoever it was, Wyndham, I think. Cecilia, Amelard, Wyndham, Cecilia. It just kept cycling through. I didn't write all of Cecilia's story first. I left off and then I wrote Amelard's, and then I just came back to where Cecilia was in her journey and wrote her chapter.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point about the map, which kind of preempts. Were you able to keep track mentally of all the different journeys and everything that's going on with each character? Did you have to make notes for yourself to wait a second? What was this again? Oh, yeah, that's what it is.
I think this must just be a skill I have, because I do hear this with other writers and especially my screenplay writers when they talk about a novel. They're like, how do you keep it all And I kind of just do. I don't really have to write. I just don't. I don't have to write a lot of things about my different characters. I can pretty much remember what they're up to and what they're doing. What usually helps, when I'm writing, I don't have chapter titles in my books. That I don't do.
Okay.
When I am writing, I'll write Cecilia, and then I'll write a chapter title that is sort of very clear about what's happening in that chapter. And it's very easy. I just can go look at that chapter and go, oh, that title, and I just remember what happened in that chapter.
Ah, very smart. Afterwards, you take it out so that way it's just...
Yeah, then I take all those titles out. They're usually spoiler alert kind of titles. I always wanted to be that writer that could come up with a chapter title that was very vague, but also made sense for the chapter. But I always would write these titles that were so specific and kind of spoiler alerts for the chapter. But they helped me with the writing process, at least.
That is a very good trick and tip. That's very smart.
Thank you.
Yeah. Usually I know story-wise where the characters are, but sometimes if I made up a name of a place or something like that, I'll just respell what I made up. I'm like, wait a second, how come it has an R here and it doesn't have an R here?
Yes, I do understand what you're talking about there. That's why having a map was great, because I could at least I would handwrite on the map so that I knew what the name of that place was, because you make up those names as you go along, right? Your character gets somewhere, you're like, oh, that's an interesting spot to have a castle or something. Yes, that is problematic with some of those things.
I wonder how much of this is your writer brain versus your math brain is contributing to the organization of all this.
Exactly. Well, the other thing I do, which I just have to do, is I have a visual storyboard. While I kind of know my basic bits, like I've written it down, maybe I had about 3 to 5 pages for book 2 and book 3 of like what the basic plots were. I also had the visuals up so that if I said Cecilia goes into this ice cave or Emmeline goes into this ice cave, I had the pictures of what the ice cave looked like. And just having that visual storyboard helps. And there's many times I'd find myself just leaning back in my chair, looking up on my wall, and my map is always up on the wall. The map is always there, and just looking at these pictures to help me either describe what the scene looks like or to just be like, well, what else can happen? They're in that there, what else can happen that can be a problematic roadblock for them?
Ah, very good. I'm like, I need a map.
You don't have your characters go on a journey, you don't have a map?
Well, my brain has a map. I finally, for what my last series, my editor told me, you're trying to keep track of too many things, put a map in here, also put a map in here for your readers. But then I'm not very artistic, so I created like a very rough map in Publisher that looked like just a bunch of blocks with like little stars to mark things, so it was very terrible. And I got it. Someone who's artistic, I was like, can you turn this into an actual map for me? And they're just like, we'll take care of it from here, because whatever you just handed us right now is not legible.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I did too. I mean, I just had this rough drawn hand kind of thing map, and then I handed it off to my map guy, Matt, and he turned it into a fantasy sort of proper looking map. The problem was though when he would say, so what's the scale? And I'm like, I have no idea. I really couldn't figure out the scale. So with the next series I'm writing, which is this big magical kind of series, I actually found proper landforms. Like I grabbed landforms from Europe. I took a page out of George R. R. Martin's book, his thing with Westeros. You know how Westeros is like island down on the bottom of England or something, and basically the wall is exactly where Hadrian's wall is. I'm like, man, I'm going to do that too. Just stole some countries in Europe, sort of pieced them together, but at least I now know that this thing here is Iceland, and I know the length of Iceland, right? So I know exactly what my distances are.
Ah, very good. Yeah.
Because it just did my head in just trying to figure out what these distances were that my characters were going on.
It makes you appreciate that cartography is actually a skill.
Yes.
Who even does it anymore? But the people who draw maps, they can do that. Wow.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's the gold for me. I mean, it just helps my brain come up with story points.
Yeah, but it's however much time it takes, if you're using that for a whole trilogy or whatever the series is going to be, it's so worth it to just make that happen, because like you're saying, it's a little guide for you. It's a map for you. For everything.
Yeah.
And then just to ask quickly before we wrap up here, is there anything specific marketing-wise that you've either seen helped a lot, or just sure, this marketing is kind of a personal experience because something works well for some person versus another, but especially that you're self-publishing it, so that means you're in charge of everything that's going on with the book. You just do social media stuff, or what do you do to get the word out there?
Yeah, I mean, I try a little bit of everything. I'm not a social media guru. I've got friends that are. They're amazing at it. They work at it, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. I mean, I started doing TikTok. Okay. And that was kind of fascinating. I just find TikTok very difficult because I'm not a front of camera person. I'm just not. I'm a writer. I don't really want to be seen on camera. So it's a challenge for me to do that. You know, honestly, I actually found that hard advertising worked in regards to AdWords was quite good in going with Kindle, like Amazon.
Oh, interesting.
What do they call it? Amazon Marketing Services, AMS. It's, again, challenging. It's scary because you've got to, in the trial and error phase, you might end up spending a lot of money on words that aren't really doing anything for you. That's changed a lot too. Even from 2017, when I did some campaigns for book one, just the cost of the words were definitely more reasonable. Now you're paying like on average like $1 for a word or something. It's like, it's kind of expensive. It does work. It does. And even the Goodreads giveaways, that's changed as well. Amazon owns Goodreads, and the prices, I mean, the giveaways used to be free, but now you've got to pay. And it just doesn't make sense to me. I don't quite understand the cost, especially if you want to give away hardcover books. And people prefer to actually have books mailed to them. You know, they prefer the books as opposed to giving away the audios. But I'm like, gosh, it's just so expensive to run a giveaway.
Yes. It's a few $100 now or something, plus you have to mail the book, and then you have to you have to publish it and mail the book.
Yeah, then you've got to go do all that. So that's the expense to the author as it is. So I'm like, why are they so expensive, even if you are going to ultimately mail this book to someone? So, yeah, I mean, I found TikTok was good, but I think like anything, probably a little bit late to the game with TikTok. I think the book talk part of TikTok really took off because of the pandemic. It just, like 2019, apparently, like at the end of 2019 going to 2020, book talk exploded, and there were some authors that just exploded because there weren't a lot of people doing books, and apparently that medium, books on TikTok, kind of really took off. From what I've read, because of TikTok, book librarians and bookstores are seeing a massive uptick in younger audiences going into a bookstore and actually buying books because it's become trendy to do book talk kind of thing, and to tell everyone what you're reading and to review what you're reading. So for all of TikTok's ills that they've probably got, they've actually done really well for the publishing industry.
Oh, well, there's always another one. Right now, this is having it's 15 minutes, and who knows what'll be next. Anything that's going to get people to buy more books, I'm happy. Well, and read,
So TikTok is becoming very much like what Facebook, you know how Facebook was so user-friendly back in the day. Now it's all about, they want you to promote your posts. So TikTok, even in the short time I've been on TikTok, I've seen it completely change where they're really now plugging that you're going to have to pay if you want anyone to see your post. You know, you can post, but you just don't know how many people are actually seeing it. Social media. It's what we call the necessary evil kind of thing.
Exactly. All right. Very good. So we always wrap up with the fill in the blank of, I really like it when anything story related, to be writers, editors, publishers, covers, series, stories, whatever, do X, and I really don't like X. How do you fill in the blank for that?
I really like it when illustrators completely nail a book cover. There's just some glorious designs out there, and I just think, how did they come up with these amazing designs? So I really appreciate glorious book covers. And well, this is just my personal pet peeve. I really hate it when agents take so long to get back to us. It's like, honestly, guys, I get that the whole thing is, you know, if you haven't heard back in 3 weeks or 3 months, it is a no. But yeah, that's my pet peeve. Just
because you have 400 people querying doesn't mean because you mentioned the illustrator, I just got to give a shout out to Leo Nichols that we spoke to a while ago. He's a cover designer, and he said very specifically, you judge a book by its cover because that means I did a good job if you pick up that book. And it's like, thank you for validating that. Well, very good. Sandra, thank you so much for your time. It was good to speak with you.
Thank you for having me on, Esther. This was really fun.
This was a bonus episode of Oh My Word podcast featuring author Sandra Rostirolla. To find out more about Sandra and her work, please visit the link in the episode notes. To find out more about Oh My Word podcast and keep track of all the great stuff we're up to, follow us on Instagram at Oh My Word podcast. Check us out at eltenenbaum.com. Music is by Tim Burke. Thank you so much for joining us. Catch you next time.